William Carter was a man who rarely smiled. His face, sharp and angular, seemed carved from stone, and his eyes carried the weight of decades spent climbing to the top of the business world. He lived in a sprawling mansion on Long Island, drove luxury cars, and wore suits tailored to perfection. But despite all his wealth and success, there was an emptiness in him that no amount of money could fill. On this particular evening, William sat at one of the finest restaurants in New York City, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and plush velvet chairs. The restaurant buzzed with soft conversations and the clinking of glasses, but William barely noticed. Across the table, his wife Patricia fidgeted with her napkin, while their son Matthew stared out the window, watching the city lights reflect off the glass. Matthew was 16 years old, though he looked younger because of his slight frame. Cerebral palsy had left its mark on him. His movements were slow and deliberate, his speech slurred, but none of that diminished the brightness in his eyes. Matthew loved observing people, noticing little details others often missed. Tonight, as always, he was quiet, content to watch rather than speak. Patricia glanced at William, trying to gauge his mood. "The food was wonderful," she said softly, hoping to break the silence. William nodded without looking up. "It was adequate," he replied, his tone indifferent. Patricia sighed inwardly. Conversations with William were like walking on eggshells. She turned her attention to Matthew instead. "Did you enjoy your meal, sweetheart?" Matthew gave a small nod, his lips curving into a faint smile. He liked coming to places like this, not for the fancy food or the elegant decor, but because it gave him a chance to see life outside their gated home. Here people laughed and talked freely, unburdened by the heaviness that seemed to follow his father everywhere. As they finished dessert, a young woman approached their table. She wore a crisp black uniform and carried a tray balanced effortlessly in one hand. Her name tag read, Jasmine. She had a warm smile and dark brown skin that glowed under the restaurant's soft lighting. "Can I take these for you?" Jasmine asked politely, gesturing toward their empty plates. Patricia nodded gratefully. "Thank you." Jasmine began clearing the table, moving with grace and efficiency. As she worked, Matthew watched her closely. There was something mesmerizing about the way she moved, fluid yet controlled, like a dancer. When she reached for a glass near Matthew's elbow, their eyes met briefly. Instead of looking away, Jasmine paused and smiled at him. "You seem interested in what I'm doing," she said lightly, her voice friendly. Matthew hesitated, unsure how to respond. Finally, he managed a faint nod. Jasmine tilted her head, studying him for a moment. Then, almost impulsively, she asked, "Do you like to dance?" Matthew blinked in surprise. Dance? It wasn't something he'd ever considered before. His body didn't move the way other people's did. Even walking required effort. But still, the idea intrigued him. Slowly, he nodded again. Jasmine grinned. "Would you like to try a step?" William stiffened in his chair. What was this waitress thinking? Encouraging his disabled son to do something so impractical, it was absurd. Before he could object, however, Patricia spoke up. "That's very kind of you," she said warmly. "But I'm not sure." "It's okay," Jasmine interrupted gently. "Just one step, nothing complicated." Turning back to Matthew, she held out her hands. "What do you say?" For a moment, Matthew hesitated. His gaze flickered to his father, who looked annoyed, then to his mother, who gave him an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, he placed his hands in Jasmine's. Jasmine guided him carefully, showing him how to shift his weight from one foot to the other. At first, Matthew stumbled, his legs wobbling uncertainly. But Jasmine stayed patient, steadying him whenever he faltered. "There you go," she murmured. "You're doing great." To everyone's amazement, Matthew began to find his rhythm. His movements were awkward and uneven, but there was a spark of joy in his expression that hadn't been there before. For the first time in years, William saw his son smile, a real, uninhibited smile, and it caught him off guard. The entire interaction lasted less than a minute, but it left a lasting impression. As Jasmine returned to her duties, Matthew settled back into his chair, his cheeks flushed with excitement. Patricia beamed at him, clearly delighted by what had just happened. William, however, remained silent. He couldn't explain why the scene affected him so deeply. Perhaps it was the way Jasmine had treated Matthew, not with pity or condescension, but with genuine respect and kindness. Or maybe it was the sight of his son stepping out of his shell, however briefly. Whatever the reason, William felt a strange stirring inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. When they left the restaurant later that night, Matthew kept talking about the dance step, mimicking the motion with his hands. Patricia listened attentively, laughing along with him. William walked slightly ahead of them, lost in thought. Back at home, as Matthew prepared for bed, Patricia confronted William in their bedroom. "Did you see how happy he was tonight?" she asked. Her voice tinged with both frustration and hope. William shrugged, avoiding her gaze. It was just a silly dance move. "Silly?" Patricia repeated, incredulous. "William, when was the last time you saw Matthew smile like that? Really smile? That girl gave him something we've struggled to give him for years. Confidence." William opened his mouth to argue but stopped himself. Deep down, he knew she was right. Seeing Matthew's joy had stirred something in him, something he couldn't quite put into words. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, William found himself replaying the moment over and over in his mind. Jasmine's calm demeanor, Matthew's tentative steps, the way his son's face had lit up. It all felt significant somehow, and for the first time in a long time, William allowed himself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than money and power. The next morning, William woke up earlier than usual. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that came before everyone else began their day. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window. The memory of the previous night lingered in his mind. Matthew's smile, Jasmine's patience, the way his son had moved with such determination. It felt foreign, almost uncomfortable to think about emotions like joy or connection. For years, William had pushed those feelings aside, focusing instead on work, deals, and numbers. But now they were creeping back in, uninvited. Patricia entered the kitchen a short while later, tying her robe around her waist. She noticed William sitting there, lost in thought, and hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Good morning," she said softly. William glanced at her but didn't reply. Instead, he took a sip of his coffee, his eyes returning to the window. "You've been quiet since last night," Patricia continued, moving to pour herself a cup of tea. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," William replied quickly, though his tone suggested otherwise. Patricia sighed. She knew better than to press him too hard. William had always been a man who kept his thoughts locked away. But this time felt different. Last night at the restaurant, she'd seen something in him, a flicker of emotion, however brief, and it gave her hope. "Matthew couldn't stop talking about that dance step," she said after a pause. "He even tried practicing in his room this morning." William set his mug down a little harder than necessary. "It's just a phase. He'll forget about it soon enough." Patricia frowned. "Why are you so against this? Why can't you see how much it means to him?" "It doesn't mean anything," William snapped, his voice rising slightly. "Dancing isn't going to change his life. It won't make him stronger or healthier. It's not practical." "Not practical?" Patricia repeated, her frustration bubbling over. "And what is practical, William? Working yourself to death? Ignoring your family?" "Matthew doesn't need another business deal or another bank account. He needs his father to actually be there for him." The words hit William like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to argue but found no response. Instead, he looked away, his jaw tightening. Patricia watched him for a moment longer before shaking her head and leaving the kitchen. Later that day, William found himself standing outside Matthew's bedroom door. He could hear faint sounds coming from inside, soft thuds and muffled laughter. Pushing the door open slightly, he peeked in and saw Matthew standing by the bed, gripping the edge of the mattress for support. He was attempting to mimic the swaying motion Jasmine had shown him, his movements clumsy but determined. "What are you doing?" William asked, his voice gruff. Matthew turned quickly, startled. When he saw it was his father, he froze, as if caught doing something wrong. I'm practicing," he mumbled, his words slow and hesitant. "Practicing what?" William stepped into the room, his arms crossed. "The D-dance step," Matthew replied, glancing down at his feet. "From yesterday." William studied him for a moment, noting the way Matthew's hands gripped the mattress tightly, the slight tremble in his legs. It was clear that every movement required immense effort. Yet there was a stubborn determination in his son's expression that William hadn't noticed before. "Why?" William asked bluntly. Matthew blinked, unsure how to answer. Finally, he shrugged. "I liked it." William didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked over to the bed and leaned against it, folding his arms again. "You know it's not easy, don't you? Dancing like that, it takes skill. And strength." "I know," Matthew said quietly. "But I want to try." For a moment, father and son simply stared at each other. Then, without saying another word, William reached out and steadied Matthew when he wobbled. Matthew looked up in surprise, but William avoided meeting his gaze. "Just don't hurt yourself," William muttered, letting go a second later. That evening, Patricia approached William in his study. He was seated behind his desk, surrounded by papers and spreadsheets, looking every bit the businessman he was. She knocked lightly on the doorframe before stepping inside. "I want to talk to you about something," she said, closing the door behind her. William glanced up briefly before returning his attention to the document in front of him. "What is it?" Patricia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I think we should find someone to teach Matthew how to dance properly. Someone who knows what they're doing." William's pen stopped moving. He looked up sharply. "You're serious?" "Yes, I am," Patricia replied firmly. "This isn't just a passing interest for him, William. It's important to him. Can't you see that?" "And where exactly do you propose we find someone like that?" William asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Some magical dance instructor. Who specializes in teaching disabled kids?" "There are programs," Patricia said, undeterred. "Adaptive dance classes. They exist for people like Matthew. All we have to do is look." William leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The idea seemed ridiculous to him, spending time and resources on something so frivolous, but Patricia's persistence gnawed at him. She was right about one thing. Matthew's happiness mattered. Didn't it? That night after Patricia went to bed, William stayed up late in his study. At first, he told himself he was catching up on work, but eventually, curiosity got the better of him. Opening a search engine on his laptop, he typed in keywords like adaptive dance lessons and dance therapy for cerebral palsy. Page after page of results appeared, detailing organizations and instructors dedicated to helping individuals with disabilities express themselves through movement. As he scrolled through the information, William felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, he was impressed by the dedication and creativity these programs showcased. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that this whole thing was impractical, a luxury they didn't need. Yet, deep down, he knew Patricia was right. If dancing made Matthew happy, wasn't that worth exploring? By the time he finally closed his laptop, it was nearly midnight. Stretching his stiff muscles, William stood and walked to the window. Outside, the moon cast a silvery glow over the yard. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a different kind of life, one where success wasn't measured solely by wealth or power, but by moments of connection and joy. The next morning, William surprised Patricia by agreeing to explore options for Matthew. "If it's really that important to him," he said gruffly, "then we'll look into it." Patricia smiled, relief washing over her. "Thank you, William. You won't regret this." Over the following days, they researched various programs together. Some were local while others required travel. William insisted on vetting each option thoroughly, ensuring they chose the best possible instructor. But despite his outward practicality, he couldn't deny the growing sense of anticipation building within him. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: their lives were about to change. One afternoon, as William reviewed potential candidates, he realized something unexpected. He wasn't just thinking about Matthew anymore. Images of Jasmine kept flashing in his mind, the way she had guided Matthew with such care, the genuine warmth in her smile. There was something about her that stuck with him, something he couldn't quite put into words. William didn't like owing anyone anything. It was a rule he lived by, both in business and in life. But as the days passed, the memory of Jasmine's kindness gnawed at him. She had done something for Matthew that William himself hadn't been able to do. She'd given his son confidence. And while William wasn't the type to dwell on emotions, he couldn't ignore the fact that her actions had sparked something in him too. After much deliberation, he decided to track her down. He still had the receipt from the restaurant, so finding the place wasn't difficult. On a crisp autumn afternoon, William drove into the city, parking his car near the upscale restaurant where they'd eaten. The streets were bustling with people rushing to their destinations, but William moved slowly, his mind preoccupied. When he entered the restaurant, it was quieter than he remembered. A few patrons sat scattered across the dining area, sipping coffee or picking at salads. William approached the hostess standing near the entrance. "I'm looking for someone," he said, his voice firm but polite. "A waitress named Jasmine." "Ula." Hostess nodded and gestured toward the back of the room. "She's working today, let me get her for you." A few moments later, Jasmine appeared, wiping her hands on a towel. Her expression shifted from curiosity to recognition when she saw William. "Mr. Carter," she said warmly. "What brings you here?" William cleared his throat, suddenly feeling awkward. He wasn't used to explaining himself to strangers, or anyone, really. But he pressed on. "I wanted to thank you," he began, his words clipped, "for what you did for my son the other night." Jasmine smiled softly. "It was nothing, really. Just a little dance step." "It wasn't nothing," William replied, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. "You gave him something I haven't been able to give him. Confidence." Jasmine tilted her head, studying him. There was sincerity in his tone, though it was wrapped in layers of discomfort. "Matthew has a lot of potential," she said simply. "He just needed someone to believe in him." William nodded, unsure how to respond. After a pause, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I want to repay you for your time," he said, holding it out. "Please take this." Jasmine frowned as she looked at the envelope. "I don't need payment, Mr. Carter. Helping Matthew wasn't about money." "I insist," William said firmly. "It's the least I can do." But Jasmine shook her head, refusing to take it. "If you really want to repay me, spend that time with your son instead. That's worth more than any amount of money." Her words struck a chord deep within William. For years, he'd equated success with wealth and power. But Jasmine's simple statement made him realize how hollow those things felt, without connection. Still, he couldn't let the matter rest. "Then let me hire you," he said abruptly, "to teach Matthew properly. Surely you'd accept compensation for that." Jasmine hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "Teaching isn't really my profession," she admitted. "I'm just a waitress." "You're patient and kind," William countered. "And you have a natural way with people. My son trusts you. Isn't that enough?" Jasmine considered his offer, her brow furrowed in thought. Finally, she sighed and said, "Let me meet with Matthew again before I decide. If he truly wants to learn, then maybe I can help. But not for money. For his sake." Reluctantly, William agreed. The next day, he arranged for Jasmine to visit their home. When she arrived, Matthew greeted her with a shy smile, clutching the edge of his wheelchair for support. Patricia hovered nearby, watching anxiously, while William stood slightly Apart, arms crossed. "Hi, Matthew," Jasmine said brightly, kneeling down to his level. "Ready to try some more steps?" Matthew nodded eagerly, his eyes shining with excitement. Jasmine guided him gently, focusing on small movements tailored to his abilities. They started with basic sways, encouraging Matthew to shift his weight from one side to the other. At first he struggled, his body resisting the unfamiliar motions, but Jasmine remained patient, steadying him whenever he faltered. "You're doing great," she murmured, her voice filled with encouragement. "Just focus on the rhythm." As the session progressed, Matthew grew more confident. By the end, he managed to complete several slow, deliberate steps without losing his balance. His face lit up with pride, and Patricia clapped enthusiastically from the sidelines. William watched silently, his arms still crossed, but there was a softness in his gaze that hadn't been there before. He noticed how Jasmine adapted her instructions to suit Matthew's needs, never once showing frustration or impatience. Her approach was a stark contrast to his own rigid, results-driven mindset. When the lesson ended, Jasmine turned to William. "I'll do it," she said simply. "But only because I think Matthew deserves the chance to explore this, not because of your money." William nodded, respecting her decision. "Thank you," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I appreciate it." Over the following weeks, Jasmine became a regular presence in the Carter household. Twice a week she arrived, at their home, ready to guide Matthew through exercises designed to improve his balance, coordination, and strength. Each session brought new challenges, but also new triumphs. Matthew's progress was slow but steady, and his confidence soared with every small victory. Patricia marveled at the change in her son. "He's happier than I've ever seen him," she told William one evening after a particularly successful lesson. "And it's all thanks to Jasmine." William didn't argue. He couldn't deny the positive impact Jasmine was having, not just on Matthew, but on the entire family. Watching her interact with his son forced William to confront his own shortcomings as a father. He realized how often he'd dismissed Matthew's interests, labeling them as impractical or unimportant. Yet here was Jasmine, embracing Matthew's passions with genuine enthusiasm and respect. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling session, William approached Jasmine as she packed up her things. "How do you stay so calm?" he asked, surprising both of them with the question. Jasmine paused, considering her response. "Because everyone moves at their own pace," she said finally. "It's not about perfection. It's about effort. You should try it sometime." Her comment stung, but William knew she was right. He'd spent years pushing himself, and others, to achieve impossible standards. Now, seeing Matthew's determination and Jasmine's patience, he began to understand the value of slowing down and appreciating the journey, rather than fixating on the destination. As the lessons continued, William found himself drawn into the process. At first he observed from a distance, content to let Jasmine handle everything. But gradually he started participating, holding Matthew steady during practice or fetching water when his son grew tired. These small acts of involvement brought him closer to his son, bridging the gap that had grown between them over the years. One evening, after a particularly long session, Matthew looked up at his father with a rare smile. "Thanks, Dad," he said softly, his words slow but heartfelt. William froze, momentarily stunned by the gratitude in his son's voice. Then, clearing his throat, he replied, "Anytime, buddy." That moment stayed with William long after the lesson ended. For the first time in years, he felt like he was truly part of his family again, not as the distant provider, but as a father who cared deeply about his son's happiness. And though he still had a long way to go, he knew he was moving in the right direction. Jasmine noticed the change in William, too. "You're good for him," she said one day after Matthew had gone upstairs to rest. "He looks up to you more than you realize." William shifted uncomfortably, unused to receiving praise. "I'm just trying to make up for lost time," he admitted. "That's all anyone can do," Jasmine replied with a smile. "Start now, and keep going." Her words stayed with William. echoing in his mind long after she left. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future where success wasn't measured solely by wealth or power, but by love, connection, and the courage to embrace life's unexpected rhythms. The weeks passed, and Matthew's progress became more noticeable. His movements were still slow and deliberate, but there was a newfound fluidity to them, a sense that he was beginning to trust his body in ways he hadn't before. Jasmine continued to guide him with patience and care, tailoring each lesson to his unique abilities. William and Patricia watched from the sidelines, marveling at their son's transformation. One afternoon, as Matthew practiced a series of simple steps, Jasmine paused and turned to William. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "Matthew has come so far. He might be ready for something bigger." William frowned, unsure what she meant. "Something bigger?" Jasmine nodded. "There's a community art center nearby that hosts showcases for people of all abilities. It's a chance for dancers, whether they're beginners or experienced, to perform in front of an audience. I think Matthew could do it." William's first instinct was to dismiss the idea. The thought of his son performing on stage filled him with unease. What if Matthew stumbled? What if the audience judged him? But before he could voice his concerns, Patricia spoke up. "That sounds wonderful," she said, her eyes lighting up. "Matthew would love it." William hesitated, glancing at his wife and then at his son, who was watching intently, clearly curious about the conversation. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" he asked cautiously. "It's not about being perfect," Jasmine explained. "It's about giving him a chance to shine, to show everyone, including himself, what he's capable of." William sighed, torn between his protective instincts and the desire to support his son. Finally, he looked at Matthew. "What do you think, buddy? Do you want to try it?" Matthew's face broke into a wide grin and he nodded enthusiastically. That was all the answer William needed. Over the next few weeks, preparations for the showcase became a family affair. Jasmine worked tirelessly with Matthew, refining his routine and building his confidence. Patricia helped choose music that matched Matthew's rhythm and personality, while William took charge of logistics, ensuring everything, from transportation to seating arrangements, was handled perfectly. Despite his initial reservations, William found himself growing more invested in the process. He attended every practice session, offering words of encouragement when Matthew faltered and cheering loudly when things went well. Slowly but surely, he began to see his son not as someone defined by limitations, but as someone full of potential. One evening, after a particularly challenging rehearsal, William pulled Jasmine aside. "I never thanked you properly," he said, his voice low, "for everything you've done for Matthew and for us." Jasmine smiled, brushing off the compliment. "I didn't do anything special. This is all Matthew. I just gave him a little push. A push we should have given him years ago," William admitted, his tone heavy with regret. "I let work consume me. I thought success meant having money and power, but I was wrong. Success means seeing my son smile like this." Jasmine placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not too late, Mr. Carter. You're here now, and that's what matters." Her words stayed with William long after she left. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace, a realization that it wasn't too late to change, to be the father Matthew deserved. As the day of the showcase approached, nerves ran high in the Carter household. Matthew was excited but nervous, practicing his routine over and over until his legs ached. Patricia spent hours helping him pick out an outfit, wanting him to look his best. Even William, who prided himself on staying composed, couldn't shake, the knot of anxiety twisting in his stomach. On the morning of the performance, the family arrived at the art center early. The venue was bustling with activity. Dancers warming up backstage, volunteers setting up chairs, and parents snapping photos of their children. Matthew clung to Jasmine's arm as they made their way inside, his eyes wide with wonder. "You'll do great," Jasmine assured him, squeezing his hand. "Just focus on the music and let your body follow." Patricia knelt beside Matthew, smoothing his hair. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. No matter what happens, remember that. William stood slightly apart, watching the scene unfold. He wanted to say something, anything to reassure his son, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he settled for placing a firm yet gentle hand on Matthew's shoulder. "You've got this, buddy," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. Matthew looked up at his father and smiled, a small but meaningful gesture that spoke volumes. When the lights dimmed and the curtains opened, the audience fell silent. One by one, performers took the stage, each showcasing their unique talents. Some danced with grace and precision, while others moved with raw emotion. Every act was met with applause, but when Matthew's turn came, the room seemed to hold its breath. Accompanied by Jasmine, Matthew rolled onto the stage in his wheelchair. The music began, a soft, rhythmic tune chosen specifically for him, and Matthew started to move. With Jasmine's guidance, he swayed gently, his arms stretching outward like wings. Then, summoning every ounce of courage, he rose unsteadily to his feet, leaning on Jasmine for support as he took a few tentative steps. The audience erupted into cheers, their applause filling the room like a tidal wave. Tears streamed down Patricia's face as she watched her son perform with such determination. Beside her, William sat rigidly in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests tightly, but despite his stoic exterior, his eyes glistened with unshed tears. By the time Matthew finished his routine, the entire auditorium was on its feet, clapping and shouting encouragement. Matthew beamed, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he caught his breath. Jasmine leaned down and whispered in his ear, "You did it, I'm so proud of you." As the curtains closed, Matthew returned backstage where his family waited with open arms. Patricia hugged him tightly, kissing his forehead. "You were amazing, sweetheart. Absolutely amazing." William stepped forward, his usual composure crumbling. "I'm proud of you, Matthew," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "More than I can ever say." Matthew's smile widened, and for a moment, the four of them simply stood there, wrapped in a cocoon of love and pride. After the showcase ended, the Carters lingered at the Arts Center, mingling with other families and thanking the organizers. Jasmine joined them briefly, congratulating Matthew once again before excusing herself to help clean up. As they drove home that night, the car was filled with laughter and chatter. Matthew recounted every detail of the performance, his excitement infectious. Patricia chimed in with observations about the other acts while William listened quietly, a faint smile playing on his lips. Later that evening, as William tucked Matthew into bed, he paused by the doorway. You know," he said softly, "you taught me something tonight." Matthew tilted his head, confused. "What?" "That it's okay to dream big, even if those dreams seem impossible at first, and that sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you to make magic happen." Matthew grinned sleepily. "Thanks, Dad." William ruffled his son's hair affectionately before turning off the light. As he walked downstairs, he realized how much had changed, not just in Matthew, but in himself. He'd spent years chasing wealth and success, thinking they would bring him happiness. But tonight, surrounded by his family, he understood that true fulfillment came from moments like these, moments of connection, love, and shared triumph. In the days that followed, life for the Carters began to shift in subtle yet profound ways. William continued to prioritize his family, carving out time for dinners, outings, and even more dance lessons. Patricia noticed a newfound warmth in her husband, a softness that had been absent for years. And Matthew? He blossomed under the attention and encouragement, his confidence soaring with each passing day. Jasmine remained a close friend and mentor to the family, reminding them that growth didn't stop with one performance. She encouraged Matthew to keep exploring his passion, introducing him to adaptive dance programs and connecting him with other young dancers. Through her guidance, Matthew discovered a world of possibilities he'd never imagined. For William, the journey was far from over. He still struggled with old habits, his tendency to micromanage, his discomfort with vulnerability. But he was learning. Each step forward, no matter how small, brought him closer to the man he wanted to be. A father who believed in his son, a husband who cherished his wife, and a person who valued relationships over riches. And as he looked around at his family, now united by love and purpose, William knew one thing for certain: his life had changed forever, and for the better. The weeks following the showcase were a blur of activity for the Carter family. Matthew's newfound confidence radiated through everything he did, from his interactions with others to the way he carried himself. He began practicing dance routines more frequently, often humming tunes under his breath as he moved around the house. Patricia noticed how much brighter his eyes seemed, how much more animated his expressions had become. Even William couldn't help but smile whenever he saw his son attempting new steps or watching dance videos online. But it wasn't just Matthew who was changing. The entire family dynamic had shifted in subtle yet meaningful ways. William made an effort to be present, not just physically, but emotionally. He joined Matthew and Jasmine during dance lessons, steadying his son when needed, or simply cheering him on from the sidelines. At dinner, he asked about Matthew's day, genuinely interested in the answers rather than offering quick nods before retreating into his thoughts. Patricia, too, felt a renewed sense of hope. For years, she'd worried about the growing distance between William and their son, but now she saw glimpses of the man she'd fallen in love with, the one who cared deeply, even if he didn't always know how to show it. One evening, after a particularly energetic practice session, Jasmine turned to William and Patricia. "Matthew's come so far," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "He's ready for the next step." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "The next step?" Jasmine nodded. "There are adaptive dance programs designed specifically for people like Matthew, programs that focus on creativity, expression, and teamwork. They could take him even further." William hesitated. He'd grown comfortable with Jasmine's lessons, seeing them as manageable and contained within their home. The idea of sending Matthew to a program outside their control felt daunting. What if he struggled? What if others judged him? Before William could voice his concerns, Patricia spoke up. "That sounds wonderful," she said, her tone enthusiastic. "Matthew would love being part of something bigger." William glanced at his wife, then at Matthew, who was listening intently. His son's face lit up at the mention of joining a group, and William knew he couldn't say no, not when it meant so much to him. "Let's look into it," he said finally, his voice steady despite his lingering unease. Over the next few weeks, the Carters researched adaptive dance programs in the area. They visited studios, met instructors, and observed classes. William was initially skeptical, expecting pitying glances or condescending attitudes. Instead, he found warmth and acceptance everywhere they went. The instructors were patient and encouraging, treating each participant as an individual with unique strengths and challenges. Watching these classes gave William a deeper appreciation for the power of inclusivity and for the resilience of people who refuse to let obstacles define them. Eventually, they settled on a program called Rhythm Without Limits, a community-based initiative that brought together dancers of all ages and abilities. On Matthew's first day, William accompanied him, standing awkwardly near the door while Patricia helped Matthew get settled. Jasmine had introduced them to the head instructor, a kind woman named Lisa who welcomed Matthew warmly. "You'll fit right in here," Lisa assured him, her smile genuine. "Everyone moves at their own pace, and we celebrate every step forward." Matthew nodded, clutching Patricia's hand tightly. As the music began and the other dancers started moving, William watched anxiously from the corner. Would Matthew feel out of place? Would he struggle to keep up? To his surprise, Matthew adapted quickly. The other participants greeted him with smiles, offering high fives and words of encouragement. One boy, slightly older than Matthew, rolled over in his wheelchair and offered a fist bump. "Welcome to the team," he said cheerfully. Matthew grinned, his nerves melting away as he joined the group. By the end of the class, he was laughing alongside his new friends, clearly enjoying himself. When the session ended, Lisa approached William and Patricia. "He did great today," she said. "I think he's going to thrive here." Patricia beamed, hugging Matthew tightly. William, though quieter, nodded in agreement. Seeing his son surrounded by supportive peers reminded him of something important. Matthew didn't need protection. He needed opportunities to grow. As weeks turned into months, Matthew flourished in the program. He learned new routines, experimented with creative movements, and formed friendships that extended beyond the studio. The Carters attended every performance, clapping and cheering as loudly as anyone else. William found himself looking forward to these events, not just because of Matthew's progress, but because of the sense of belonging they brought to the family. One afternoon, after a particularly inspiring rehearsal, Lisa pulled William aside. "You've done an amazing job supporting Matthew," she said. "But have you ever thought about getting involved yourself?" William blinked, caught off guard. "Me? Involved how?" Lisa gestured toward the bustling studio. "We're always looking for volunteers, people to help with logistics, mentor participants, or even assist during performances. It's a great way to give back." William shook his head instinctively. "I'm not sure I'd be any good at that." "Nonsense," Lisa replied firmly. "You've already shown so much dedication to Matthew. Why not share that with others?" Her words stayed with William long after he left the studio. That night, as he sat in his study reviewing work emails, he found himself distracted by thoughts of Lisa's suggestion. He'd spent decades building his career, amassing wealth and influence, yet none of it had brought him true fulfillment. Could volunteering really make a difference for others and perhaps for himself? The next morning, William surprised Patricia by announcing his decision. "I'm going to volunteer at the studio," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. Patricia stared at him, stunned. "Are you serious?" "Yes," William replied, a hint of determination in his voice. "It's time I did something meaningful." Volunteering proved to be both challenging and rewarding. At first, William struggled to find his place. He wasn't used to taking orders or working closely with strangers, and the fast-paced environment of the studio overwhelmed him. But slowly, he began to adapt. He helped set up equipment, organized costumes, and assisted dancers during rehearsals. Over time, he earned the trust of the instructors and participants, many of whom came to rely on his steady presence. One Saturday morning, as William adjusted lighting fixtures before a rehearsal, Lisa approached him. "How's it going?" she asked. William shrugged. "It's different, but good." Lisa smiled. "You've been a huge help. The kids adore you." William glanced at the group of dancers warming up nearby. Several of them waved at him, their faces lighting up with recognition. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, one that had nothing to do with money or status. Back at home, the changes in William became more apparent. He laughed more often, shared stories about the studio, and expressed pride in Matthew's achievements without reservation. Patricia marveled at the transformation, grateful for the man her husband was becoming. Even Matthew noticed the shift, often seeking out his father's advice or asking him to watch new dance moves. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Patricia turned to William. "Do you remember what you said to me months ago? About success not being about wealth or power?" William nodded, recalling the conversation vividly. "Well," Patricia continued, her voice soft, "you've proven that to be true. You've given our family something far more valuable, a second chance." William reached for her hand, his grip firm yet gentle. "I couldn't have done it without you, or Matthew, or Jasmine." Patricia smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We're a team, William. Always have been." As they sat there, bathed in the warm glow of the evening light, William realized how much he'd taken for granted over the years. Success wasn't measured by bank accounts or business deals. It was measured by moments like this, quiet, simple, and full of love. Months turned into a year, and the Carter family continued to grow closer together. Matthew's passion for dance became a cornerstone of their lives, shaping not only his future, but also the way William and Patricia viewed the world. The once distant businessman who had prioritized work above all else was now actively involved in his son's journey, volunteering at the studio and attending every performance with pride. The transformation wasn't just limited to William. Patricia found joy in seeing her husband reconnect with their family, and Matthew blossomed under the combined support of his parents and Jasmine. Together they formed a bond that felt unbreakable, a team united by love, acceptance, and shared experiences. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled outside the window, Lisa called William into her office at the studio. She greeted him warmly, handing him a cup of coffee before sitting down across from him. "I wanted to talk to you about something important," she began, her tone serious yet kind. William leaned forward slightly, curious. "What is it?" Lisa smiled. "We're planning a special event next month, a gala to celebrate 10 years of Rhythm Without Limits. It'll be our biggest fundraiser yet, and we'd like you to give a speech." William froze, his mug halfway to his lips. "A speech? Me?" "Yes, you," Lisa replied firmly. "You've been such an integral part of this community. Your dedication has inspired everyone here. We think your story could inspire others too." William shook his head quickly. "I'm not good at public speaking. I wouldn't know what to say." "You don't have to write anything fancy," Lisa assured him. "Just share your experience, how you've seen Matthew grow, how volunteering has changed you. That's all people want to hear." For days afterward, William wrestled with the idea. Public speaking terrified him. The thought of standing in front of strangers and baring his soul made his stomach churn. But deep down, he knew Lisa was right. His story mattered, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was real. And maybe, just maybe, sharing it could help someone else see the value in second chances. On the night of the gala, the venue buzzed with excitement. Tables were draped in elegant white linens, adorned with flickering candles and floral centerpieces. Guests mingled, chatting animatedly while soft music played in the background. The Carters arrived early, dressed in their finest attire. Matthew wore a suit tailored to fit snugly over his wheelchair, while Patricia beamed beside him in a sleek navy dress. William stood tall in a charcoal gray suit, though his hands betrayed his nerves, fidgeting with the cuffs of his shirt. Dinner concluded, Lisa took the stage to introduce the evening's speakers. One by one, participants shared heartfelt stories of overcoming challenges through dance. Then came William's turn. He stepped onto the stage, squinting against the bright lights as applause rippled through the room. Taking a deep breath, he adjusted the microphone and began to speak. "When I first walked into this studio," he started, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach, "I didn't expect much. My son, Matthew, had recently discovered dance thanks to a kind waitress named Jasmine. At the time, I thought it was just a phase, a fleeting interest that would fade away. But it didn't. Instead, it opened doors none of us ever imagined." He paused, glancing toward the table where his family sat. Matthew gave him an encouraging thumbs up, and William felt a surge of gratitude. "Dance gave Matthew confidence," he continued. "It taught him that his body, though different, was capable of amazing things, and along the way it changed me too. Before this, I measured success by money and power. I thought being a provider meant working long hours and building wealth. But I was wrong." His words grew softer, tinged with emotion. "True success isn't about what you earn. It's about what you give. It's about showing up for the people who matter most. For me, that means being there for my wife, my son, and this incredible community." The audience listened intently, many nodding in agreement. Some wiped tears from their eyes as William spoke about the lessons he'd learned, about patience, humility, and the importance of believing in others. When he finished, the room erupted into applause louder than he'd expected. Stepping off the stage, he found himself enveloped in hugs from Lisa, Patricia, and even Matthew, who wheeled over to clap his father on the back. After the gala, life settled into a new rhythm for the Carters. William continued volunteering at the studio, finding fulfillment in helping others discover the joy of movement. Matthew thrived in the adaptive dance program, forming friendships that extended beyond the studio walls. Patricia marveled at how far they'd come as a family, cherishing the moments they spent together. Jasmine remained a close friend and mentor, visiting the Carters often to check on Matthew's progress. On one such visit, she pulled William aside. "You've come so far," she said, her voice warm. "I'm proud of you." William chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I couldn't have done it without you, or Matthew. You both showed me what really matters." Jasmine smiled. "Sometimes all it takes is one moment to change everything. Remember that night at the restaurant? You saw something in Matthew. Then even if you didn't realize it." William nodded, remembering vividly. That single dance step had sparked a chain reaction, leading them to where they were today. "Thank you," he said sincerely, "for everything." As winter approached, the Carters attended another showcase hosted by Rhythm Without Limits. This time, Matthew performed alongside a group of dancers, their routine blending fluidity with bold, expressive movements. The audience cheered wildly, clapping and shouting encouragement as Matthew beamed with pride. Watching from the sidelines, William felt a swell of emotion unlike anything he'd experienced before. Later that evening, as they drove home through snow-covered streets, Patricia broke the silence. "Do you remember when we used to worry about Matthew's future?" she asked softly. William glanced at her, then at Matthew, who was dozing in the back seat. "Yes," he replied, "but not anymore. Not after tonight." Patricia smiled, resting her hand on his. "We did good, William. All of us." William squeezed her hand gently, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. They had faced challenges, made mistakes, and stumbled along the way. But through it all, they had found strength in each other, and in the belief that love and connection could overcome any obstacle. That night, as William tucked Matthew into bed, he paused by the doorway, watching his son sleep peacefully. The boy who had once struggled to find his place in the world was now confident, happy, and surrounded by people who cared deeply about him. William realized that their journey wasn't just about Matthew finding his rhythm, it was about the entire family learning to move together, step by step. Closing the door quietly, William returned to the living room, where Patricia waited with a cup of tea. Sitting beside her, he reflected on how much had changed. Wealth and power no longer defined him. Instead, he found meaning in moments of connection, in the laughter of his son, and in the warmth of his wife's embrace. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily to the ground, blanketing the world in quiet stillness. Inside, the Carters sat together, grateful for the life they had built, a life rooted in love, resilience, and the universal language of dance.